Hi, I'm Suzanne Turner, and welcome to a podcast delving into the personal narratives within the clinical research industry. Through candid interviews, we'll learn about the personal journeys and motivations of individuals who have chosen this profession, what I like to call their why. This podcast is not just for industry insiders. It's for everyone curious about the human side of healthcare. Beyond the industry's negative reputation, we'll shed light on the dedicated professionals behind clinical trials. Join us as we uncover the heart and passion of those working tirelessly behind the scenes in clinical research. Welcome to Heart of the Trial. Okay, hello, lovely listeners. Welcome to Heart of the Trial, where we uncover the human stories within clinical research and shed a positive light on the pharmaceutical industry. I'm your host, Suzanne Turner, and today's guest is Elizabeth Nelson. She has over 25 years of experience in medical and clinical research. So welcome to the show, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is an absolute pleasure. So why don't you start by telling our listeners what it is that you do in clinical research?
Okay, great. Thank you so much again for having me. So what I do in clinical research is I am an auditor, a consultant, and a trainer. So I like to balance all of those things. I'm the person that comes in and finds your problems that you may or may not be aware of, but really wants to work with you to help address those issues so that we're all moving forward in quality.
That's amazing. So how did you get into that side of the clinical research?
So actually the way I got into clinical research is different than how I got into the quality piece of it. But I got into quality. Yeah, I got into the quality piece, unfortunately, because we were involved in a large global study at my site where I was working. And we ended up having to turn the sponsor and 2 CROs into the FDA. So we hired, it was unfortunate. We hired, this is a global company, all global companies, but we had a former FDA investigator come in and do our site qualification visit. And so we kept in touch with her. So when I contacted her, I said, listen, I just have some questions for you. This is what I'm seeing. This doesn't make sense. This is what we're being told. We're not going to do that. And now we're being pressured to do this. And she was like, I gotcha. And so she kind of came in and was like, no, we actually went through the ombudsman program at the FDA. And she, liked how I wrote and thought, and I guess. And so it kind of took me under her wing. And I worked with her for a few years doing consulting work and doing audits. And I just found that for me, a lot of what we see with audits is it wasn't because people were trying to do the wrong thing or, there are certain those folks out there, but it was because no one had ever taught them how to do the right thing, right? They had left them to their devices like, oh, well, you're a doctor, you're a key opinion leader. Sure, certainly you know how to do this.
Like they assumed.
Exactly. And sponsors would be selecting investigators based on their prescription capabilities and their status. But we're required to select people as experts to study our product. So I found that when I had folks that were non-compliant, oftentimes it was because they didn't know the right way. Well, my monitor told me to do it this way, and they didn't even know what they had signed up for in many cases. So that's just evolved for me in terms of, you can audit and you can go in and you can wag your finger at folks. But if we're really trying to get, as you heard me say before, good data from protected participants, and support the public's health, then help them get there. So that's how I've got into clinical quality, and that's why I stay there.
So you actually started by working at a site then? That's the side that you started with?
I did. I started out, and that's also an evolution. When I first started in clinical research, we couldn't go and get a degree in, clinical research or clinical quality management or things like that. It didn't exist. So I actually came from a laboratory background. I had been working at the CDC doing biochemistry and pathology. And before that, I was at the Department of Energy doing some analytical chemistry. And I needed to finish my degree. It took me 10 years to get through my undergrad degree.
Oh
I
my
had
gosh.
one last class because I worked the full time. I had one last class to
Right.
take, and I was working in a neuroanatomy lab. And then I found this job. I had a friend that reached out and said, listen, I'm leaving this post. Would you be interested in this? I think you'd be a good fit. And so I moved over into pediatric cardiac anesthesia, sedation, and pain management research
Oh,
for
wow.
10 years. And I literally walked in the first day to the NICU, and I thought, okay, what am I doing? So I've
Yeah.
always been very methodical in my approach. I worked with a fantastic clinical investigator. He was a tenured professor. He was doing research for all the right reasons, trying to get access to his patient population for novel therapeutics, and he wanted to be part of it. So I worked with him for 10 years, and I learned an awful lot.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's been an evolution. I love the fact now
Yeah.
that folks can go out and get a degree in this. So
Yeah.
it was very circuitous for me, but it seems to have worked out.
And you said that it was during one of the trials working at the site that you guys ended up turning in, you said the CRO and the sponsor both?
2 CROs and a sponsor, yes. We had a main
Oh
CRO, a
my
sub
goodness.
CRO, and the sponsor.
Right.
Well, unfortunately, they were not behaving themselves. So they were sending folks in, and they were walking away with source, and they were altering information. They were telling us to alter stuff because they were really, so that was my kind of baptism, if you will, into clinical quality. I'm like, I know this isn't right, but like, how do I
That's not
anchor
right.
this? And they were trying to get a patent extension. And they had decided that they were going to move forward, and yeah, at all costs, because we were keeping them from getting that patent extension. And unfortunately, we did keep them from getting that patent extension because the data that they were submitting was not the data we had generated.
That is crazy. Well, I mean, good for you guys because I've been doing this for about 12 years and I don't think I've ever heard of a site turning in a CRO and sponsor. I think that's the first I've ever heard of that. I usually hear about like the opposite
Sure.
where, they're turning it in and even in which for the audience, so they know, like I took an auditing course with you this summer and you told us some crazy, crazy stories, but you mentioned that several times, like the sponsor and the CRO, you having to inform them of stuff happening at the site. And I feel like that's what I experience as most common. So I think that's
Yes.
very cool that as a site, you guys stepped up and you're like, no, this is wrong. And obviously it worked. The FDA stepped in and did their job.
They did. And like I said, my investigator was fantastic. He was like, no, because and we were very disappointed because the product actually worked.
Yeah.
And we wanted to be able to offer that. But, he's like, I'm not going to do it this way. We're not going down this path. So it was
Good
very
for
contentious. Him. Yeah, he's a great guy.
Oh, I bet.
It was very
I bet
contentious.
it was very, very contentious. Yes.
Yeah. And
I bet.
So we had, proffered to them, we will have independent people come in and watch what we do so that we can make sure that the data that's getting reported to you, it's from us, but without your monitors coming in, literally manipulating information. And they wouldn't go for that. So they said it was too expensive. I'm like, okay. But so their patent clock was ticking. So I learned hard lessons about the industry side of it. I went into clinical research because, and at the time too, I wasn't a nurse, and everyone said, how can you do this? You're not a nurse. Well, I was a scientist. So my boss really liked that. So, so we approached it that way, but unfortunately it didn't work out for that particular study, but it also gave me, and like I said, my boss was great because I started working with this former FDA investigator, and he supported that too. He's like, go learn as much as you can, bring it back to us and to this institution. So that was 20 some years ago. Yeah.
That's amazing. And so now what do you feel like, because you do several things, what do you feel like you do the most? Is it like the auditing or is it training?
That's a great question. It kind of comes in waves. At this point in time for the year, we're, coming at the end of September, the training's really picked up because everyone's trying to use their training budget. But it's been a pretty heavy auditing year. So we do see the industry kind of wax and wanes, but I do try to keep a mix of it because I feel if all I did was audit, I think a big part of training. Yeah. And big part of training is having those real life experiences to be able to share with others, to really kind of hit home some of the points. So I like to keep that mix. Lately, I would say, though, I've been doing a lot of consulting, particularly during the pandemic, a lot of remote audits, but SOP gap analysis, training gap analysis, things like that. So it's all those pieces that come together. But, some years are more training heavy, others are more audit heavy. But I do try to balance those out.
And how does it work, the auditing process? Like, do sponsors just like reach out to you and say, hey, we want you to come look at these sites? Or how does your auditing process work?
So that's one example where sponsors will contact me. I've been really fortunate over the last, time that I've had my own business that it's word of mouth and folks, will get in touch with me. So either a sponsor contacts me, I've had IRBs contact me, clinical investigator sites contact me. So, and CROs too. I've had CROs contact me to audit their sponsor because they're having trouble with the sponsor. So it's just making sure that you can have that independent eye on what's happening and understand, we're not attached to any one entity as auditors.
Right.
So wherever we can help and bridge that quality gap, I'm more than happy to do so. So any, all comers, so to speak, we will get contacted and do the best we can to help support them.
That's awesome. So I'd love to be able to share a few of the stories that you've experienced over the years, because like I said, there were several you shared during the course that were it's just kind of jaw-dropping. But before we do that, I'd really like to talk about your why, because doing this for as long as you've been doing it for over 25 years, something's kept you going. So what's your why? Why do you keep doing what you're doing?
That's a great question. I appreciate that because I think sometimes we don't stop and ask ourselves that. We just go on autopilot and we do it because it's what we do and we can do it with our eyes closed and, we just do it. Why I do it when I sit and think about it is because this is how I feel I use my public health degree. I know that, and certainly as I get older, I become more of a consumer of these therapies.
Right.
But I want to make sure that these products are safe and effective, right? That's what we're doing. Yeah. And so if we can put a product out there, and, it's very gratifying to see where, even if you see something advertised or, as a nurse now, I went to nursing school during the pandemic. So I see where we're prescribing things for folks. And I'm like, hey, I was part of that, and it's working for you and it's helping you. So that's really gratifying. So I like to make sure that if things are being done, which we know that they're being done, clinical research isn't going to stop, that I have some part in making sure they're done properly. And because I have those 20 years of experience and some of it has been, trial by fire, I want to share that with others. Hey, did you look here? Did you think about this? Just this morning, I was working with a group and they were talking about, hey, we have a phase 1 study and we're not required to register on clinicaltrials.gov, so we might not. Like, yeah, but your phase 1 study is for people who are affected by the disease. You're enrolling them in your study. And clinicaltrials.gov is a patient-facing portal. So you're doing them a service when you post that. It's not like you're just gathering up a bunch of undergrad students and having them be in your phase 1. So really thinking about just those experiences, bringing it in and trying to share it with other people. And they can take it for whatever they want. But I just feel that it would be a waste if I had this information tucked away in my head and I didn't inflict it on others.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a great reason. And actually, I love that you brought up clinicaltrials.gov. I actually think this might be the first time it's come up on my podcast. So I think for any listeners, if they're not familiar with it, it's really good for them to know that, yeah, you can go to that website. Again, it's clinicaltrials.gov, and you can see all of the active, ongoing, closed studies going on out there, and find one to participate in, which is really cool. So I absolutely see why you gave them that advice. So that's amazing. And let's talk about the importance of the auditing process and why you feel that like it's so important for sponsors and CROs or even IRBs, like you were saying, to do this.
Yes. So I think that anytime we have, the stakes are really high in what we do. And I think we need to have that independent oversight. We all get, just even as auditors too, like you said, you get in a groove and you just think, well, this is the way I've done it. This is the way I've always done it. I'm just going to keep doing it that way. But things change, right? People change, the regulations change, the guidances, and just the environment. The industry has changed significantly since I started out in 1997. So I think that independent quality assessment, I mean, we're the assurers of quality, if you will, but it's really important because you do need to have those outside eyes saying, did you think about this? Did you see this? Like, you might think it works or things are working because it's what you've always done or everyone on your team is in agreement, but it's not always a pleasant place to be. Not everyone loves an auditor, but if we can come in and just get you to think differently about things, there is no requirement for clinical quality assurance in the regulations, but there is a requirement that you follow those regulations. And so when we can help you interpret those and maybe fit those into your management systems and style better, we've done our job.
Yeah. And something you just said jogged my memory, because one of the things that you mentioned during the course this summer was with you talking about, being a third party, seeing outside of what's going on, was how every patient had like the same like blood pressure, was it? Like they all had the exact same blood pressure, and it turns out like the equipment wasn't calibrated or something. Am I kind of remembering this right?
Right. So it was like 86% of all participants across 5 studies had the same blood pressure and mean arterial pressure. And the equipment was new, but the person who was operating it didn't know how to use it. And they were embarrassed to tell their investigator they didn't know how to use it. So they Googled what was a good blood pressure. So they put in the blood pressure for everyone because they thought that was a good, these aren't sick people. They just have mental illness. So that's a good blood pressure. But I did see variation when someone other than that individual was the one taking blood pressures. And so that's how I knew something was up. You just know something's up when almost everybody has the same blood pressure. But so that, and I appreciate you bringing that up too, because that's something that we have the opportunity to do as auditors. We look at patterns, and that's why central monitoring, right? Risk-based monitoring, data management is looking for that too. So we're just kind of that extra layer of, hey, this doesn't make sense to me. Where your monitors are going in and they're looking at blood pressure for visit 1, visit 9, what have you. Hey, the blood pressure's there. It's good. We're pulling back and looking at things a little bit differently.
Right. And even the investigator because on day-to-day basis, they're just seeing their clients, they're looking at things, and it just doesn't register. So I just thought that was really cool, because that's something that you had the opportunity to step back and see. And then resolution had to come from that, right? So
that's right. And if you'll remember, he had already done all the work for me, right? Because he had his own source document worksheets that had the vitals for every visit. It was all sitting right there. It was just, like I said, having those different eyes looking at it. And that's what we do.
Yeah. And some other things that I remember you talking about was how you have to try to keep calm and not put your own perspective on things, even when the reality is you really want to like wring that person's neck, because you're like, how could you do this? So can you tell me about that, how difficult that can be, being composed in moments when you know that someone's just being belligerent or purposefully messing with things?
Sure. And that is frustrating. I mean, I certainly have my soft spots revolve around vulnerable populations. So, I mean, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do my job for anyone, but particularly when you have, the elderly, those who maybe have cognitive impairment, children, socioeconomically, educationally disadvantaged. Yeah, that's just not a population you want to be messing with. So, what I find is that, yes, I can be upset about that, right? My job is to protect people. It's the way I look at it. I look at myself as a steward of that participant's health and well-being and
Mm-hmm.
rights and safety. So it does get frustrating. And you have people, like to your point, that are like, what's the big deal? Not a problem. Or, I'm just going to do it this way because my monitor doesn't have a problem with it. I don't know who you think you are coming in and telling me this. And what I know about myself is that as upset as I might be, and the injustice that I feel, and the way that I want to advocate for these people and protect them, is that my passion is going to impair that. So I need to step back and make sure, whether it's taking a walk in the parking lot or talking myself down or what have you, is that
Yeah.
I need to make sure that the information that I gather is factual and objective. And I need to put that into a report in a way so that others can pick that up and be like, that doesn't sound right. That's not cool at all. Because if I say, this person is belligerent and this person, then my opinions and my emotions
Right.
stand in the way of them being able to say, huh. So, or that's just that auditor's opinion. And it is our opinion
Right.
when we write an auditing report, but we bring that
True.
opinion because we have factual, objective evidence to support it.
Right.
And I think I told you about that going into that closeout meeting one time where someone said, oh, be prepared for a fight. And I'm like, there is no fighting in auditing, right? You cannot like what I find, but what I find stands on its own. And that's what all of us
Yeah.
auditors are trying to do. And I think if we allow our emotions to come into the mix, then we do a disservice to the people that we're trying to protect.
I like that. I really like how you said that. And gosh, how long have you said you've been auditing now? About.
I've been auditing 22 years. I've been involved in clinical research for 27 years.
And do you feel like you've kind of seen a shift? Because I feel like I was working, I started out at a CRO and then I worked with a consultant company and now I'm an independent consultant that works directly with sponsors. And I feel like sponsors they seem much more open when I'm going to conferences and everything. They're like, do inspections, do mock audits, do that type of thing. Do you feel like you've seen a shift in that way where, again, it's like, welcome, like, come audit us, tell us what we're doing wrong. We want you to tell us, not the FDA to tell us,
Right, exactly. I do. And that's been really refreshing too. And some people are not, are kind of disingenuous about it. For the most part, when you walk in and start an audit and do your opening meeting, people are like, we're so glad you're here. We want to do a good job. And it's good to have
Right.
your eyes tell us this. And that's great. Now, going back to your question about, sponsors and things like that, some of them are. Right. Some of them are really kind of clueless. We've got all these great startups. We've got all these different kinds of products out there, and they have a really good lab background, but helping them transition into the clinical, they're like, oh, well, I had a friend that used to work for this big company 20 years ago and they did it this way. I'm like, yeah, they also got fined $2 billion. So they don't do that anymore. Right. So there's a reason for that. So let's bring it back to the here and now. So yes, we have had, companies that have been fined a lot because of what they were doing with clinical research. And that did, put some people back, in line. But I do see that there are a lot of these companies that are trying to step out on the right foot simply because of their funding structure and the fact that their company is built around one product and they want to make sure that they get it right. So yes, certainly, that ethical, happy part of me is like, yeah, we all want to do the right thing. But sometimes doing the right thing comes because, hey, we only have one chance to do this and we can't afford to get it wrong. So whatever it takes, I don't care. As long as you're willing to be compliant, I don't care what leads you there. So I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. That's really cool though. Okay, so I would love if you're able to tell us, obviously within confidentiality and all that good stuff. But do you have a story or two that you can share with us, like something you've experienced recently or maybe a few years ago that was really impactful to you when you were doing some kind of an audit?
I think one thing that comes to mind is, and it's hard to really replicate this, but I always like that light bulb moment where people are like, oh no, I didn't know that was my responsibility. And I was doing some remediation training for an investigator. He was very well known in his field, very well known internationally in his field. And we were doing some remediation training because he had some issues with his clinical research. And sharing with him, I asked him, okay, this happened. Tell me about it. What happened? And for him, he was very grateful because I wasn't coming in and saying, I know you messed up and we're going to do this. I'm like, I want to understand why, we got here. What do you see? So there were some gaps in his understanding of what was required of him as a clinical investigator versus a clinician. So we talked about that and he's like, yeah. And he was rationalizing why he did what he did. And then when I started providing him with warning letters, and then with NIDPO letters and, talking to him about this is the path that they went down. And like, do you see any similarities here? And the look on his face, we were doing it over Zoom and he just looked up and he's like, am I going to jail? And I'm like, well, that's why we're here, right? So let's not get there. So that's always refreshing. And I check in with him. I make sure that it's not just like a one and done sort of thing. I'm like, how's it going? And I check in with the people that contracted me to, help him.
Wow.
They're like, he's really towing the line. So that's really, I feel like I've done my work because I know he's at the top of the pyramid when you're looking at that clinical site. So if he's understands how critical it is to do things the right way, that's translating down to his staff as well. So that's very gratifying when we see that change because we're always, as we talked about in class, we're always looking for executive management being engaged. So that's good. Yeah. And there's also that satisfaction of getting a product approved and seeing it in use. I volunteer here locally, and I was up at the hospital last weekend or the weekend before, I think. And I saw that some of the things that were being used, I'm like, oh my gosh, they did it, right? So something that I had worked on was now being used. And so that's really refreshing. Cool. It is. And that was something that I had done a mock inspection for because they knew they were going to have an FDA inspection. And it went well. The mock inspection, we got our stuff done. They said the inspection went well. And, you go off and you do other things. And it caught my eye. I just happened to see this product on the cart for this company. And I was like, good for them. So, and I knew that it was being used to help, these neonates. So I was really, really grateful for that. So there's a lot of reward in what we do. There's certainly, like I said, some grumpy folks sometimes. But if you think about why am I really doing this, that will help you get through those bumps.
That is really cool. And, in class, you were talking about also, which I don't know that everyone thinks about this, because when we think about auditing, for those of us in clinical research, we probably do mostly think of the sponsor or the CRO and possibly even the site. But you were talking like even IRBs or ethics committees can be audited. So do you have experience? Do you have experience actually auditing an ethics committee? Have you ever done that?
I haven't audited ethics committees as they're termed, but IRBs I have because I've done that stateside.
Yes.
So yes, and we also talked about how I think that is something that is sponsors overlook too much because there's the expectation that your IRB is compliant, and if your IRB is not compliant, you as a sponsor are not compliant, your investigator is not compliant. And as we also talked about, it's the easiest audit to do remotely. So because they are mandated to have certain procedures and you ask for those procedures and see if, they're following them. So IRBs absolutely can be inspected. And as a matter of fact, also we talked about that the FDA knows that if there's a local IRB and they're inspecting an investigator, they can say, oh, well, if that IRB hasn't been inspected in the last 5 years, we're going to add them to our list. So I think that's one of the most overlooked pieces. I was just having a conversation yesterday with a group about this, that, IRBs do all sorts of nonsense, just like the rest of us. And we have this, this magical bubble around them
Yes.
that, oh, well, the IRB approved it.
Yes.
Everything's good. So we have
Yes.
a system of checks and balances in clinical research. So we
Yes.
we as auditors can check all of y'all and see how you're doing. And you should be checking on each other as well. And so I get sent out
Yeah.
by IRBs and I get sent to IRBs.
That's awesome. I can say as someone who my expertise is in the child master file is I have seen IRBs make errors. I have seen it where
Absolutely.
they've sticked the wrong thing on there or whatever it is. So like I do agree with you. I think this is like a gap area because I don't think I've ever heard of a sponsor like asking for an IRB, a local ethic or a local IRB. Probably more likely that's where I would imagine I would see it because the big ones, they could be audited by anyone, but if you're bringing a local one, it's probably not going to be as common. I've never heard of it, but it's like, should sponsors like? How should they go about that, or at what point do you feel like that should become something on their radar?
Well, the monitors should know enough about what's expected, right? The investigators should know about enough about what's inspected from these IRBs. And you have telltale signs, right? Like you said, they have the wrong thing stamped, or I've seen IRBs approve a consent with another IRB's contact information that gets, like you said, used and filed away, so I think in my experience going to local IRBs, now certainly I've done IRB audits for vendors, right? Sponsors will send you out to go to your vendor IRBs, your centrals. But for the local IRBs, it's because something has been surfaced during a clinical investigator review or information that they've been providing. So historically, the information sheets that the FDA has out for IRBs and investigators has put it as the responsibility of investigators. Like if we're going to a local IRB, we go through the investigator to check that IRB. But now it's kind of everyone's available. So those are like from 1990, 1991, those information sheets. So we have, when I've gone into a local IRB, we have asked the investigator to, introduce us, like, hey, we're coming. But honestly, if you're selecting a site and they're using a local IRB, they're your vendor too. So your site's your vendor, your investigator, your IRB, they're your vendor. So we should make sure as sponsors that we're making sure that they're up to the task. And we sign the back of the 1571 as sponsors that ensure the IRB is compliant, and the investigator signs it on their behalf that IRB is compliant. We better make sure of it.
And are sponsors like able to ask, would they ask the sites or the IRB themselves and say like, hey, have you been audited in the last 2 years? Can you show us that documentation?
Oh, sure. They can ask, have you been inspected? What was the outcome? And is there any attendant documentation? They can ask for a written procedures table of contents. They can ask for specific written procedures. They can ask for clarity in approval letters that are getting more and more vague. What did you actually review and approve? This is what was submitted, but is there documentation that you reviewed it? Now, sponsors from a business risk perspective will typically not take an IRB approval letter and say, no, we'd like you to do it over. We'd like you to clarify it, because that's going to hold us up in terms of enrollment. But you spend a lot of time on the back end if you can't prove that you had IRB approval for your study to move forward. So it's just better to have those systems in place up front, check those things, make sure everyone's on board, work with other entities that understand the importance of it, that aren't looking at you as just, being difficult or just asking for, things that aren't relevant, because it is relevant. Someone's going to ask you for it eventually. And like you said, it's better that it's us than the FDA.
Yes.
But if you can start out proactively and having these things in place, like we talked about the federal wide assurance number and how that's not relevant for us in industry sponsored research, understanding and knowing those things. And to your point, everyone trying to do the right thing on the front end is going to make things a lot easier for us and smoother for the study.
Gosh. Oh, so much easier. It's so much easier to do it right from the beginning than to go back and fix things. And I think sometimes when these sponsors / CROs, they make these decisions, they don't think about the there's several different types of impact, right? So not only time to fix things, but the financial impact to fix things, like the risk you're putting your study at. Think of all the millions of dollars you've spent on it just to put it at risk because of a silly decision. And, actually one thing that you said during class, that you said it multiple times and I loved it, is like, no one wants to hear that their baby's ugly. You know what I mean? Like
it's true,
they don't
right?
It's so true. So like, they don't want you to come to them and say like, your study's a mess. But again, it's better that you tell them that and they try to fix it than the FDA tell them. So
that's right. Absolutely. That's my mantra there. And I think too, if we can step forward in quality, it's easier to keep it, going. And, I don't know. It's pretty clear in terms of what the expectations are from the FDA, that they don't expect us to try to tidy things up just because they're coming. They expect us to be functioning in quality.
And inspection ready at all times.
Absolutely.
I try to warn individuals about that. And I feel like I've kind of talked about it some on the podcast, is that, yes, you can, if you're submitting something for approval, like they're going to show up to inspect you. But the reality is they can show up anytime with no notice. They can literally just come knocking on the door today. And the last thing everyone wants is to be panicking and scrambling. So be prepared and know you're doing the right thing.
Right. And a lot of folks bank on the fact that they don't have the resources to do that, to just show up, surprise visits. So, but I think too, they're going to ask, how do you do this? Like, how do you follow what's required of you? How do you make sure you do it in a uniform, compliant manner? And the proof's in the pudding, right? At the end of it, when everything comes out, and you're having to scrub your data and clean and try to storyboard your way out of trouble, you know that there's definitely a problem. And you get to see it all from a trial master file perspective, right? Because everything filters down to you. So
it all comes back to the TMF. Yep.
Right. And you're like, oh, well, here's a financial disclosure form that's, checked all the boxes, but no one signed and dated it. Or it's signed and dated, but none of the boxes are checked. And you shipped investigational product to this person already? Oh, yeah. We're like 20 patients in. Yeah, 20 participants in. So it can be messy.
Sometimes it's worrisome. Sometimes it's worrisome when I see things that get to me and think how many steps it had to go through to get to me. And no one noticed it. But that's one of the reasons, honestly, I like to, I now specialize in working with smaller sponsors. And I really like that because I do feel like there's a lot more attention to detail, because as you know, when you get into those larger pharmaceutical companies, those larger CROs, they're just so busy and there's so many people and so many pieces that it's so easy to lose track of things and documents and such.
And to keep things happening in a uniform fashion.
Yes. Right. Oh, yes. Consistency. Oh my gosh. That's like a mantra for me, like consistency. I don't care if you file the document in the wrong place, as long as you consistently do it. So everyone knows where it is. So yes, just be consistent. So that is so cool. And you also do, with the training stuff, like you were talking about, doing training with PI. Is that what most of the training you tend to do is with sites, with PIs, and that type of thing?
It's a little bit of everything, where I'm needed. Standard training, like we did the course together, standard GCP training, investigator meeting training, going in and training IRB staff, going in and training CROs and sponsors, going in and training whole departments. So I go to academic medical centers, really wherever the need is. I mean, whenever I was just reaching out to someone I know that they are working on launching clinical trials with, she's part of an association, a disease, association. But I said, I'm happy to do pro bono work. I know that some of these folks are going to be new to this, but I would love to lay down, because this is a near and dear. Not only is this my friend, but this is near and dear to me, this disease. So I'm happy to help anybody that, doesn't have access to this, because, most institutions have access to city training and they can do that, which is a great starting point, but not all of them do. So, where do you go and find this? And what we find going to the training piece is that people will reach out and look at the free online stuff, which is great. It's great that it's there, like the NIH's NIDA, but it may not be fit for purpose for the type of product you are studying or the regulations that you need to be compliant, with which you need to be compliant. So it's good if we can customize that out of the gate and look at, what are your strengths? What are the areas that could use some strengthening so that, we're required as sponsors to provide investigators with all the information they need to properly conduct that study.
Yes.
And so training is a big part of it. I just had a client this morning say, well, if they can give us a certificate, do we need to train them on GCP? Unless you know the content of that training and you can review it, then you do need to train them because you're relying on someone else telling them what is going to be, what they think is important for your study and your population. So training, I think, it's interesting. It's the knee-jerk reaction whenever we have a CAPA, but it is also starting out the most overlooked piece of it.
Yeah.
Of what we do.
No, you make a really great point there. Yeah. Sometimes I think, like you said, the knee-jerk reaction when a CAPA comes is to go straight to training. But if individuals are really looking into it, that may not be the root of the problem, right?
No.
So, and not only that, but when they say training, are they following through on it? Did they do the training? Did they follow through on it? And then did it actually fix the problem?
Exactly.
And it's all around that. And I've seen that myself that, we'll just train them. Okay, but was that really the root of the issue or is the process not working?
Right. And what did you train them on? And how did you train them? And who did the training? Do they even know? Right. You can train the right people on the wrong thing, the wrong people on the right thing.
Yes.
You really need to understand issues. And again, if we've given people all the information they need, meaning we've tailored the training to that disease state, to that therapeutic area, to that investigational product type, to their skill set, then we level set so that when something happens, we can say, oh, well, then apparently it wasn't the training. It was maybe something else. But like I said, we immediately go back to, we'll just retrain them. Well, you could just, like I always say, for some people, the spaghetti never sticks to the wall. So you can go ahead and keep doing all the training you want, but it's not going to work. So you really need to understand why.
That's right. And, sometimes like with trials, they tend to create and within reason and for a reason, like they create a training and that's a standard training across the board because, maybe it's a PowerPoint and that PowerPoint is the same for the entire study, right? But everyone learns differently. So maybe just because a person took that training doesn't mean that they don't need a little bit different training to help understand it. So not and something always taken into consideration. Yeah.
Right. And how do we usually present training? It's read and acknowledge, which tells me you know how to read for the most part.
Yes.
But not that you know anything about what you read.
Understand it.
Right. Exactly. And how to apply it and implement it. So we really could bridge that gap in our industry. But I think we think of training, like I said, if you're willing to accept somebody else's training certificate, you're looking at training as an item to be filed away in the trial master file, but not really assessed for, is this the information you need?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're spot on with that. Because one of the things you mentioned in class also, because I remember asking you to like repeat it so I could type things down, was like with the GCP training, it's not just the fact that there is GCP training, but does it have all the right areas to cover it from within the regulation? So, and I know from a Team F standpoint, most of the time when I'm working with sponsors, it's like just ensure there's GCP training present. But it isn't beyond that next level because, and honestly, it never occurred to me because my expertise is in the Team F itself, not necessarily always the content within the document. So hearing that, I even brought it up with one of my sponsors, like, have we talked about which GCP is actually required? So, yeah.
Right. Because your job is they do the work and your job is to make sure that you can show that they've done the work. But we don't always dig deep with that. Yeah, just recently had a group who wanted to, because it was free, they were a sponsor, but because it was free, they wanted to use this free training module. I'm like, okay, but that's all investigator responsibilities. It's focused for investigators. And they said, well, that's fine. We'll get a certificate. And I said, yes, you will get a certificate that says that you've been trained on investigator responsibilities. They're like, but then we'll write a note to file that we read 21 CFR 312. And so we understand sponsor responsibilities as well. I'm like,
oh my God.
Okay. I caution you on
good
that.
Luck.
However, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, good luck explaining that to an inspector. Yeah. Exactly. And that's the other thing, right? From a consultant side, and you brought this up during class too, and it's my experience too from the team as a TMF consultant is we give them our suggestion and we say, this is what I'm telling you based on my experience, the regulatory codes, this, but we can't make them do anything.
No. Yeah, right. I mean, it depends how we're hired to do. I can't, right? Because as an auditor, right. I can't have my fingers in the pie, but I do. And my husband's like, I can't imagine why people would hire you, because I do tell folks, listen, I expect you to do the right thing. When things come down to it, I said, and if not, I will do the right thing for you, because that's my job.
I love that.
So, usually people don't take me up on that. They're like, no, we got it.
No, I love that. I love how you brought that up in class too. And it's like the fact that, well, you're honest about it, but the fact that if they're not going to do the right thing, you're willing to take the step to ensure that they're inspected or whatever needs to happen. Because at the end of the day, the job is to protect the human participants and
not your bottom line.
It's not about hurt feelings. It's not personal. Right. Yeah. It's not about money. It's protecting the participants. I think that's amazing.
Right. Like I always ask folks, are you looking for a short-term or a long-term return on this investment? Right. Because if you're going to put the effort in up front, it's going to carry you forward. But like you were talking about trying to clean up everything at the end, you put all those resources there.
It's so
no
hard.
Guarantee it's going to work out for you.
Yeah. It's such a pain. I definitely say from a TMF standpoint. So I imagine it is throughout the entire process. Trying to clean up is such a pain. Just do it right from the beginning.
Right. Right. Like what we talked about, I'd rather take away your matches than put out your fires, right? Let me build that quality in up front.
Yes. And I appreciate sponsors and CROs that like they do when they are truly trying that. That doesn't mean it's going to be perfect and you aren't going to run across things. Like you said, it's not like they're purposefully not trying to do things right. It's just they may not realize it. But I feel like some of them are starting to get that, or at least key people are. And then when they're in the right place within an organization, they can have that impact.
Exactly. And as long as you can justify why you did what you did, as long as it gets you to compliance, even if it's not the most efficient way or the way that we're used to seeing, if it works, it works. And that's really what it comes down to. You have to be able to, when you're standing in judgment from a regulatory agency, I did it this way because I thought this is the way I should do it. And I think it worked, so I feel confident with this. And that's all we can hope for, right? We're not infallible. Right. And I always say it's that perfect data that makes me twitch. So I'm glad when I see, we messed this up, but this is how we got ourselves back to where we needed to be. That's all you can hope for.
That's all you can hope for. And I think that's a perfect place to wrap up. This has been such an amazing conversation. But before I let you go, where can the audience reach you if they'd like to get in contact with you?
Oh, sure. If there are any questions, let me know. You can call me or text me. My number is 304-685-0608, or you can email me at enelson@regriskmanagement.com. So Suzanne, I want to thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you in class because you had such great insight and questions, and I really appreciate that. And this is amazing to me that you do a podcast. As you know, I even had a hard time just downloading the app. So this is incredible. And what a great way to share, not only my experience, which I'm grateful for you inviting me, but other people's experience.
Yes.
We need as much hand-holding and help as we can. It's a community. And if we're all working towards quality, it's good to be like, hey, have you thought of this? Or don't go that way. Yeah. So this is a great service you're doing too. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you again for your time and being a guest. And I'll definitely make sure your contact information is in the show notes. So thank you so much.
All right. You take care. Have a great weekend. Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
This brings us to the end of today's episode. I want to extend my sincere thanks to our guest for sharing their inspiring journey. If you'd like to connect with them, you can find their contact information in the show notes. I also want to express my gratitude to you for joining us on this exploration of the clinical research industry. I hope you found today's episode insightful. If so, please consider leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. It truly helps us reach more listeners. If you have any feedback, questions, or comments about the show, feel free to email me at podcast@iceconsultingllc.com. Thank you once again, and I look forward to having you joining us on our next episode of Heart of the Trial.